Hello everybody, again another video tutorial from this Madax. So I would like to show you in this one some steps else and some ideas that maybe you have to know when you want to paint this kind of dramatic light. So what happens when you want to represent non-metallic metal? So the first question that you have to ask you is, where is that area? Where is that non-metallic metal? So for example, that piece, maybe it's in a place where you have to play with a lot of contrast. So in my mind, at the beginning, I was thinking to paint just with a flat white. Maybe when I'm going to take a photo, will look awesome. But then when you see the model on your hands, will looks like you need to add more definition or more details, more information. So for that reason, then I was thinking about, hey, maybe I have to play with a lot of contrast and a lot of color. But it's true that this area it's really tiny. So maybe we have to play with a lot of contrast, like going to pure white, and forget the colors. So I was thinking what kind of color I should use. So for example, if I use colors like steel or colors with more blue, maybe I'm going to change the temperature in that area where I want to play with something a bit warmer and with a lot of light. So this kind of color I thought that should be better using just on the bottom parts on other non-metallics. However, I was thinking this kind of gold or laton or colors like that, like bronze maybe. And then I was thinking that something with yellow, this kind of desaturated yellow could be great. And then play with a lot of contrast. So play with a lot of white. In that case, I would like to say with a lot of white, because at the beginning I was playing with some ivories and colors like that, and then I discovered that I need more contrast. So I was playing at the end with much more white there, because I wanted to play with something similar like I have on his chest. So what do you have to do when you have a flat surface? Paint with a lot of contrast and decide what kind of value do you want there. Because if the value is really close to pure white, maybe you have to play just with pure white and then add some nuances. Or maybe if you want to create some noise, information like I did it, like the casted shadows that I represented between the fur and this part. So all these ideas, you have to think them before to paint, because then if you don't know what kind of color will you use that, maybe you will understand that area like exactly another kind of non-metallic. And this project, it's completely different. You have to think everything before to paint, because this dramatic light will change everything. Maybe in your mind this color or this piece will work different in different places. It's not the same there, where is the highlights very powerful, than when it's, for example, on his boots or, I don't know, his bottom part of this model. Okay, you can see here how I use this dilution, the 50-50, to blend and recover again more area with this contrast. And then the skulls. What happens when you want to paint skulls? So in your mind maybe are white, just that. So white for that color is perfect, right? More or less okay, because what happens when you have a non-metallic metal, like I showed you, near to these skulls? If both looks or should look like white, what happens? Because which one is the roof for each material? So maybe in your mind the skull should be white, but what happens with a non-metallic? Maybe we have to play with much contrast, but if you are playing with pure white, you don't have another roof to cross. You don't have the possibility to define a new ceiling or roof. So think about that, because this is the reason why I've decided to start with something darker, because on that way give me the possibility to find the new ceiling, the new roof, the new cap. So where is the highlight point? Where is the color that I want to represent in the highlights? Previously about this, you have to think what kind of color you should use at the beginning. So for that reason, I was playing with this kind of browns on all the skulls, not just pick one and paint from the beginning to the end. So choose all of them, paint all of them with the first 1, 2, or 3 layers, and then you will decide which one has more highlighting or more contrast, and just pick this one and finish that area. So if you see, I was playing with casted shadows with these skulls, and for that reason, the back part, there is a shadow with the first base coat, and this is the result. So I don't want to cheat nobody. This is what I work with the casted shadows, just painting less area, but paint the 90% where you need it. So in that view, you can see perfectly that the back part has the previous base coats, but this is the reason to get the contrast. If you remove the color there, you will get less contrast than if you keep it. So sometimes paint less give you more information than paint more. So, and you will see that the skulls will have a lot of white, but a bit less than the non-metallic. And maybe if you have the same, I recommend you use the airbrush at the end to blend over that, or use your brush to paint some washes or glazing, or add, I don't know, blood, for example, over that to change this information for a new one and get different contrast. Because if you are playing with the same contrast, then will be really weird to understand if something is a skull, why have the same contrast as the non-metallic. In my opinion, the non-metallic metal should be brighter than the skulls. And remember, these kind of skulls are really tiny, so just paint between every layer with much more contrast than you usually use, and blend with the 50-50 dilution I explained you will get the perfect contrast. However, if you're playing with a low contrast between every layer, maybe you will need much more contrast, because maybe you are playing with 80 layers without enough room to continue working, and every layer is too close, so you won't get this contrast that you should use. So for that reason, I recommend you paint with more contrast between layers and then blend with the 50-50 dilution, okay? This kind of glazing. And you will get something like that. So then the next step, what happens when you want to represent leather around skin or human skin? So you will play with similar colors, similar browns. How we can change that leather or the color from this leather between the skin and this other skin, this leather. So I recommend you think, what kind of colors do you have on your model? If you are playing with magentas, for example, maybe you have the possibility to play with this kind of orange at the beginning, or maybe with a bit of green inside. And you will get not the complementary color, but you will get different colors. So will look completely different than if you are playing with leather with a bit of magenta. If you are playing with colors similar in the same places, maybe will look really weird to your eyes, and you can find the differences. So you have to define very well with the dark linings to represent every material. So in my opinion, if you play with colors a bit different, will be easier to define it. And as you see, I'm painting with this kind of orange because I don't have orange on my skin. Maybe when I was blending with airbrush, I create some nuances close to this orange, but it's in tiny places, so don't care about that. It's about the main part, about the main color. So if you see the skull, you can see on this leather, you can see perfectly the casted shadow that I'm working on every material like that, this kind of casted shadows. Because I would like to create this dramatic light. So if you paint them, you will get much more information. But think that the visual part, the attractive ideas, it's much more interesting for me than the realistic. So because that models couldn't be realistic. So have you seen the scale? That model in real scale, how big should be? Because nobody will see the eyes, for example, or these tiny details with that definition in something tiny like that. So the models are fantasy, are fake, and for that reason, the sculptures trying to find the aesthetic on every model. So, and this is what I'm trying to chase on my painting. So if you will add more information painting the casted shadows, you can add them. If you will lose another kind of information that could be interesting on your model, maybe you don't have to add them. So at the beginning on this letter, I decided to start with something more saturated. Remember that I told you that the skin, I would like to represent the most saturated area. But then, testing on other colors, like this leather, I've decided to start with a bit saturation in that, because then, with the next layers, I'm going to remove that saturation. If you play everything with a desaturation, maybe at the end will look boring about color. So for that reason, at the beginning, I've decided to play a bit more saturated than I should use, and then lose that saturation with gray colors. So you don't have to go to pure white. You can play with a bit of blues inside to get this kind of grays or greens, colors like that, to have something more desaturated. And then how we will get that contrast, that dramatic contrast? I'm going to get it with inks at the end. So I don't want to play going up again and again and again on every material. Some of them, maybe we have to get that contrast after, when we will blend with airbrush, or we will use the inks, or at the end. So we will add more shadows to get the result that we want. But now, with this, I think is enough. Check, for example, the different size of the scratches, the dots, that in some places are a bit thicker and in some places are a bit thinner. This is because I would like to represent every area a bit different. With the same color, you can represent different style, different stuff. So here you have it. And now something new. What happens when you want to represent or define a chain like that? So first, paint with a lot of contrast. Okay, that's right. I know how to paint with enough contrast. And then what happened about the non-metallic effect? It's interesting, right? So first, I recommend you play with enough contrast with the base coat. If you see, I was using the base coat from the skin. For me, in that case, works perfectly, so don't care. And then with the next layer, I'm going to play with enough contrast, but not with pure white. It's like a mid-gray. And in that gray, I'm using a bit of blue. Why? Because if you are playing over the skin and over that leather, if you are playing with magentas and you are playing with orange, in my case, maybe play with something with blues could be great. Or maybe with a bit of green. These both colors will be colder, so will work perfectly. And you are playing with something different. You will get the contrast between colors. So I think with that, just with one layer, you will draw all the chain perfectly. So the idea is remove everything, less the dark lining between every part of this chain. This is the first step. Then the next one will be add some highlighting, where in some places you don't have to add the highlighting everywhere, because if you paint everywhere, then you won't get enough contrast. So much more important, have enough contrast in some places and less in another one. Why? Because then you can add some glazing, you can add rust, you can add washes, you can add another kind of information that will be easier once time you have done technical part. So choose one or two places to add the new highlighting like you are watching now, and just that. So it's something really, really tiny. So the best idea or the most important part, it's defined with the first layer. The next one is just to represent the effect about the material, just that. So some of them I repainted 90% and some of them I painted just a bit. But the most important is the edging. It's really, really important. Once time you understand that, you will see how easy it's paint everything. So if you see areas like this one, because are really tiny, paint with enough contrast with a flat color, and then check if you want to add or you can add more information, add it. But the most important is paint like that. If you're playing in places really tiny with a low contrast, trying or thinking that then you will add a new one and another one and another one, you won't have the possibility to continue adding more and more layers. So in my opinion, it's better define with enough contrast to represent the dark lining and this new color. And then if you want to paint another highlighting, like a tiny spot, like a bright, perfect. But this will be later, okay? So the leather wraps or leathers like this belt. In that case, I would like to represent it just with these thin lines, vertical thin lines to represent another kind of leather, just to offer you something different than the other part of the leather. Because if all the leathers or belts looks the same, could be a bit boring because all of them has the same texture and couldn't be realistic. Remember that I'm trying to find the aesthetic idea on everything, and if you repeat or you have similar finish on different areas or different size, could be that like you be a bit boring painting that area. So for that reason, I recommend you paint them. At the beginning could be okay, painting the same way, but then you have to change them. So for that reason, you can see that the belt looks a bit different than the other belt, other leather. And what do you have to know? The highlighting. So the edge highlighting, it's really important. If you see, now I'm playing with a lot of contrast. Maybe in your mind it's too much contrast. Don't care. Paint with enough contrast because you want to represent something satin. And be careful to use colors similar like the skin. If you feel that you are going too near to the skin color, try to change it with a new color in the next highlighting. So don't care, you don't have to repaint everything. With the next one that you will have to add to get more contrast, maybe you have the option to add some blues or greens or something different to add there and get the differences about the color. Sometimes, as you can see now, I'm trying to draw sometimes this highlighting to represent some thin lines and give me the option to get more definition. So for me, remember, paint the highlighting and the dark linings are really important. So if you don't paint them, then you will see like your model is a bit blurry. If you paint them, maybe it looks like cartoon in your mind, but it's true that if you see with some distance, you will see perfectly every detail. And I think this is the most important part, because if you want to see your model from a cabinet, from a display case, you will see much better than if you don't paint them. For example, here, I understood that it's too close to the color scheme and I changed it for this one, a bit less saturated. So what happened about the edging? Sometimes you understand that the edging has a lot of contrast. It's depend of the material. For example, if I want to represent the non-metallic metal, in the down part, you will see how I'm playing with a really dark color on the area, and then using the edge highlighting to get this contrast. So when I say you don't have to paint white highlighting, edge highlighting for a black color, it's depend of the material, because in some materials maybe you have the option to add it, but be careful with that words, because I don't want to see, for example, a white clothes with a black dark lining, because it's too much contrast. Maybe with a dark gray will be much better. Okay, so it's depend the material. If you are playing with something satin or glossy or like non-metallic metal, maybe you have the option to cross that ceiling and paint with a lot of contrast, with black and white. For example, that areas that they are really tiny, you have to paint with enough contrast, because then you will use the airbrush, or then you will add more information and you will lose that contrast, or maybe just to see that area, because without that contrast, you couldn't see. Okay. So and now this is the last step on this video tutorial. I hope you have enjoyed watching the previous part. And now this is the end. So I would like to talk about this because are you ready to paint a freehand? I think you will do really great. So what happens when you have an axe or a sword or a weapon without edges? Like in that case, looks flat, completely flat. You have to draw them because in my mind doesn't have sense go to the war with an axe without edge. So in that case, because don't have edge, I've painted just that. Paint the edge, and then it's the moment to continue adding. So this kind of edge is the first freehand, but then we will paint more freehands. So for example, something interesting that maybe you won't see if I don't say, it's that side of this edge I've painted with this kind of ochre, of this warm color. But then the other one that I'm going to draw, I'm going to paint with something with a bit of blue inside, something colder. Why? Because the angle is completely different. So if at the beginning we start with different colors, will be much easier control it and understand the volumes, the color, the value, everything than if we play with exactly the same color. So remember, the beginning, it's really important. So as you can see now the axe, you can see one side and the other one that now looks completely different, just from the beginning. And then some stippling, some texture, some scratches to prepare the background for our freehand, because yes, I'm going to paint a freehand after all that. So at the beginning, I recommend you paint some scratches and dots like stippling with a capibase. But then I recommend you paint with 50-50 dilution or like a glaze, making like spirals or circles, like to create random dots, just that, like you are watching now. Some of them thicker, some of them thinner, don't care. It's just to create some damage on this weapon. This is because that axe, in my opinion, it's a bit flat without detail. I thought that if I add something there, could be much interesting. So once time you have something like that, it's the time to add, for example, if you want to represent some stippling with more contrast to get more depth in some areas or create different depth on the scratches, it's the time to do it. Paint the edging on every side. And more or less now it's ready to paint some freehands. After all that freehands, I'm going to paint a freehand. Just to lose the fears about that. Can you see how I'm working on this freehand? Just like that. So don't care, don't fears, just try. Just test. So I'm going to paint something easy to give you the possibility to learn how I'm working that and lose the fears about that, because it's much easier than you think. For sure, if you want to draw a dragon firing, maybe you will need more time, or maybe you will need more skills. But something like that, come on, you can do it. You can paint something like that. It's really easy. It's just paint like that. So losing brush strokes without care, and then fix that sketch. How? Just painting inside, trying to paint a bit thicker, and just that. Or if you need to remove in some areas, just use the previous base coat to create some scratches there, to create damage and remove the freehand, and we'll be okay. So I don't recommend you play with glazing there. It's much better paint just with one or maybe 2 layers to cover perfectly. Because if you are trying to paint with glazing to paint the freehand, you will need a lot of time. You don't know where you are drawing. So in my opinion, first draw what do you want to represent, and then paint inside, like that. So more or less we have our first freehand. Remember that you have to paint in both sides of the axe. So you have time and area to experiment on your model. So after that, I hope you have enjoyed watching that video tutorial. I hope surprise you, and thank you so much for your huge support. Okay, so see you in the next video tutorial. Bye bye.